All right, welcome to our first podcast of 2015. And this, I'm not going to say month or week this time because I'm not exactly sure what the schedule will be, but I am very pleased to have as my special guest Mark Zeter, who you may, or I should say definitely should know as the publisher of the Zojo Development Magazine. And Mark, welcome.
Oh, welcome. Hi, thanks.
And I figured I would just give Mark a moment to talk a little bit about the magazine. He's been working on it for an incredibly long time. I remember when he first sent out the emails saying he was thinking about starting it. And he did start it, and it's been going continuously ever since, which is fabulous, absolutely fabulous.
Just started our 13th year.
13 years.
The January issue is the start of the 13th year.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about how that kind of kicked off and how things are going and about that.
Well, I started with Zojo. Back then it was, of course, called Real Basic, and that was back in 1998. And I was working full-time as a graphic designer, and I was wanting to create some utilities that would make a lot of things that I did as a graphic designer were very routine and cumbersome, and I wanted some utilities that would just automate things and do little simple things. Like I wrote one that was helped me rename files because I'd get all these people to bring me Windows files that had weird file names and horrible extensions, and so I wrote a program that would just rename them all the way that I could understand. So I discovered, Real Basic, started using it, started my own little software company, wrote the program, a word processor called ZWrite, which was pretty highly acclaimed back in the late 90s. And during that process, I think it was 1999 when I first had the idea to create the magazine, mostly because I was, back then we didn't have the forums, we had the mailing list, and I was seeing all these people who had all these questions, the same type of questions, beginner questions.
Right.
And there was just a lot of people that would gravitate to the product because it was easy to use, but they weren't traditionally trained in programming. So they were doctors, lawyers, various types of jobs. And they, just similar to me as a graphic designer, wanting utilities that were custom built for my specific needs, that were too small to have Adobe or a big company write these utilities. So I found there was lots of people in the Zojo community were like this, that were like a doctor, and he didn't like any of the off-the-shelf stuff for how to organize his, doctor's practice and keep track of, patients or whatever. And so he wanted to write his own thing using, at the time, was Real Basic. But when I first had the idea, I started working on it in 1999. I think I actually emailed a few people and was talking about it, and started making a little bit of plans. And I quickly realized two things. One was this had to be a full-time endeavor. It was just too much work, and it's too deadline-oriented. And I knew that if I didn't do it full-time, that it would just die on the vine, like so many projects do, where people say, I've got a new thing I'm doing, and then, they keep up with it for like a few months, and then pretty soon it's gone,
Right, yeah, certainly. Time is always what you're battling with.
Yeah, and it hasn't been updated in a year, and you're kind of, are they still doing it, or, and so anyway, so I realized that, and then I realized if I was going to do it full time, it had to be, some kind of a paid thing. It couldn't just be like a free magazine that people could read, and, it had to be something. So I wanted to do something that was, professional, that the writers were paid, that, theoretically I get paid, and this could be something that we could do. And so I set about kind of thinking along those lines, and was actually 2002 when that actually finally, I finally was in a position to be able to do that. So I quit my job and launched the magazine in 2002. So we actually, I started the process in that spring of 2002, but we actually launched that summer, and launched it at Macworld in New York. At the Real Studio booth, or Real Basic booth, whatever it was called back then.
Right. Yeah. I remember all those emails where you were asking for writers, and
so and it was really really cool. It got good response and stuff. And at the time we were doing a primarily the print edition, because that was considered the way to do things back then, and people were a little bit more hesitant about the digital. And of course, nowadays, I think I'm going to get another call here. Okay, maybe not. I put my phone off, but it's still ringing here for some reason.
Always the case.
But and it rings on all my devices now that we've got this handoff.
Yeah, that happened to me for the first time yesterday with Yosemite. My chiropractor called to remind me of my appointment, and everything lit up in front of me.
Yeah,
phone call coming in. I'm like, what? What's going on? How do I stop this?
I've got an iPad and a computer and the phone, and so it's like they all ring at the same time. It's neat when you need it, but when you don't need it, it's kind of annoying. But anyway, so I back then we were primarily print because the digital wasn't quite as acceptable. But now in 2008, I actually switched to digital only. And now what I do is I just do the main print thing we do is I do annual books that are like 500 pages thick that we basically put a whole year's worth of issues in print form so that people that want print can still get those at the end of the year. And they're just kind of nice for just kind of looking through stuff. And, sometimes it's nice to have a book and you can just flip through and find things like that. And it's just a different, way of looking at things. If you need a specific exact thing, the digital is actually better because, of course, you can use a search feature and say, find this exact topic. I want something on text fields or whatever topic it is. You can,
find it. I agree. As you can see, podcast listeners won't be able to see, but occasionally I do video things and people can see my bookshelf behind me. And on my shelf right here, completely visible, is my complete collection of Marx magazines sitting up.
Yeah, it looks good. It's nice. It's fun having a big stack like that. So it works pretty good. So, yeah. And most recently I did actually bring back a print edition, which I'm actually printing myself on my laser printer and assembling and mailing out to people. And so I've got a handful of print subscribers that have
oh, really? I saw you were doing the print. I didn't realize you were literally doing the print.
Yeah. Well, I've thought about it for a while. I used to use a service called MagCloud.
Right. Yeah. And I ordered a few from MagCloud in the past.
Yeah. And they're really expensive. And I basically make like a couple dollars on each issue. And, it doesn't really profit me at all, and because they're so expensive the last few issues, the last issue we just did is 90 pages, so no, it's more than that, I think. They're 98 pages, I think, was the January issue. They're just getting huge, and that's a lot of pages to color pages to print, because the way MagCloud works, it only prints full color.
Yeah, the quality from there was great, but yeah, it was pricey.
Yeah, but this summer I actually got a great deal on a color laser printer, and so now I can actually print them myself, and so I just do that because I only have even with MagCloud I was selling 5 or 10 an issue or something. It was not a
well, it's certainly not going to scale if you end up having to print hundreds, but
right. Right, exactly. But it was kind of nice to offer it, for the handful of people that wanted it that way. And, so now I just do that myself. And the big thing was with MagCloud was you couldn't offer subscriptions. So people had to go each time and buy each issue manually one at a time. Whereas if I do it myself, I can sell it as a subscription, which is a lot easier, I think, for people that want it in print. That's a good way to do it, But
print is nice to just get it, to have it delivered to you rather than remember to seek it out.
Exactly. And but the big thing is, print is pretty much dead. I think everybody really has embraced digital now. I mean, the fact that there's Kindles and all these other devices, the iPad. I mean, the iPad, you think about it. I launched in 2002. iPad was launched in 2010. It was 8 years later. And, now we're several years past that, and it's, people are comfortable with digital now. So now it worked really good. I still publish I use PDF as my format, mostly because as a graphic designer, I like being able to control the layout and know how things are going to look. As a designer, that's important to me. When you design something with HTML-based things like an EPUB, for example, the text is allowed to reflow, and you never quite know, what size device people are looking at it on and how it's going to resize and change things. And I find that as a designer to be very, I guess, scary or uncomfortable, it just because I never quite know how it's going to look, and I can't control that. I feel a lack of control, and I don't like that. It's one of the reasons I hate web design, which you could probably tell from my website. But which definitely needs to be updated. But you know, it's the PDF is nice because it's going to look consistent on everybody's platform, and it's still a little bit designed, you know, with print in mind because of that. But at least at this point, I'm still comfortable with that. I don't know how people.
Yeah, I think it works well having it that way. Because I mean, I do like getting the books. You know, after the year has finished, I also order up the complete book to have everything in there, and I think it's definitely helpful for you that you don't have to completely do a whole new layout just to get it in a print format.
Exactly,
and it's definitely very readable. I mean, on something like an iPad, you know, the page is a page, and you're just going to flip through them anyway.
Right. Right. And currently right now, the way everything works, it's very hard to design things for multiple devices and still have them all look somewhat similar. You know, I am working on a top secret project, which is no longer top secret since I'm talking about it here. But I am working on it's a product that I'm actually writing in Zojo that actually it's probably I'm guessing it's probably a couple years down the road before this will be actually viable to use for the magazine. But I'm writing a program that will basically take my text, my raw text files that the authors give me, and basically produce a PDF, an EPUB, and a Kindle version of the magazine or whatever I do, you know, books or any kind of, you just put the files in markdown format, and then it converts them all to these formats, just, you know, with one push of a button. And when I get to that point, then I'll be able to offer more formats and things like that, which might be useful. But I've been looking at, I've been, you know, working on this program for a couple of years now and looking at different things and I've got it so I can do like just a basic layout. It'll work just fine. Especially the XDev publication layout is very simple. But when you got all the different sections, you got things like ads and pictures and a variety of things like that. It does get a lot complicated. It gets pretty complicated, and it's difficult to make an automated system for that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as you can tell, I've looked at lots of things to get, you know, our Zojo docs out in multiple formats, and there's nothing that really works well.
Right.
I mean, for the user guide, I've always been using iBooks Author, which spits out PDF, not a very great version of PDF, and it spits out the actual iBooks document. And then there's tools that'll convert those things to like EPUB and stuff, but they just do an awful, terrible job. I mean, converting the PDF output to EPUB was pretty much unreadable.
Horrible. Yeah.
And so the only way you can do anything remotely good is to start with something pretty low level like Markdown or HTML and then convert that up to all the other formats. But it can be rough because you don't have really much control over layout, if any at all. And
right.
And then editing in those formats for anything that's lengthy is kind of a hassle as well.
Right. Well, the cleverness with my system that I've got, which is what I think is brilliant about it, is that I use ZojoScript. So basically, within your book, you can actually, or whatever you're compiling, let's say an issue of the magazine, I can actually embed Zojo scripts, and the Zojo scripts can customize how that book or whatever it is assembled.
Oh, nice.
So actually, yeah, so you can do some really cool things with it. So I've got it so that it can automatically generate, I can feed it some text, for example, and it'll generate a cover graphic from that text. I wouldn't use that for the magazine, but for certain other kinds of publications,
right.
that can be kind of cool. And you can do various things inside. So if you have like an exception where you want something to look a certain way on a certain page, you could actually have a script that would get called on that specific page and have something special happen. And because it's ZojoScript, you can really automate and customize stuff and do neat things. So, like one of the first things I did way back when was I was creating it and I came up with the idea. I automated it, so that it actually created two versions of the PDF. One was a small size for the iPhone, and it did a full size 8.5 by 11 for like the iPad.
Right. And
then it created a small, tiny version just for the iPad. So you had it didn't reflow like an EPUB. It was still a PDF, but it made the page size smaller. And this was all done with one, you just hit one button to click, and it creates it. And then if you find an error, you just hit the button again and it recreates it all. And it's pretty cool. But right now there's still a lot of bugs and a lot of things to work out. So like I said, it's probably going to be a couple years before I get to that point. But I really would like to get rid of having InDesign in the middle of the workflow, because that's what I do right now. And
I've never worked much with InDesign. I mean, it can do a lot, but it is also kind of a pain from what people that have used it have been telling me, and that's why I've kind of
it's basically it's super, super powerful. It's the equivalent of using Photoshop to crop a photo. It's it's overkill for most people's needs when you can just use a simple freeware program or something to do something like crop a photo. You don't need all that power, but the way InDesign works is you get all that power whether you need it or not, and that can be overly complicated for a lot of things and not always what you want to do. And so I'm get a little rant here, but I'm very anti the whole renting software thing, that model that Adobe is.
That Adobe's doing. Yeah, I'm not too up on that, but they charge.
Yeah, they only offer it via subscription, so you have to pay $50 a month, and if you stop paying $50 a month, your software stops working.
Oh, I didn't realize they were only doing that. Okay.
Yep, only doing that. Yeah, and same for all the Creative Clouds. So I'm running the CS6, which is the last version that doesn't work that way. So my version, you pay for it once and you can use it forever, as long as it still runs. Now, when Yosemite came out, Yosemite, I like to speak literally. When they came out, I say Skizzers too, but when they came out, new software upgrades, you never quite know if your software is going to continue to work or if it'll have bugs and stuff. So, like, for example, the current version, the version of InDesign that I have does not support Retina displays. So all the text and everything while I'm laying it out looks really crappy. I'll export it as a PDF, and then I'm looking at the PDF in Apple Preview, and I'm going, man, this looks really nice, And I was like, why didn't it look? And then I switched back to InDesign. I'm like, oh, it's all fuzzy and crappy. What's going on? Oh, yeah, that's right. It's not Retina, because you get spoiled with the Retina, and then you start looking at it, the PDF, and it's all just super crisp, and you've got it, zoomed down so it's a quarter size of the actual size that it should be, on my screen, and I can still read all the tiny text, because it's so crisp. Can't do that in InDesign. So, but Adobe, I keep hoping that they're going to change their policy. That's one of the things I like about, and it's one of the things we've talked about with Zojo is they're going to these annual renewals and things like that, but it's and they sometimes call it a subscription, but it's not. You're not renting the software. You're just paying for the upgrades. You're
right. You still have access.
You still keep that version and can continue to use it. So you're not forced to upgrade. Whereas with Adobe, if you stop paying that $50 a month, your software stops working. And I'm going, I don't like that. That's
yeah. I don't want to. It does surprise me a little. They went to that completely. I mean, I know like Microsoft has both. You can still buy like Office and keep it, or you can do their Office 365 and like pay. I think it's probably annually. I don't really remember, and then it stops working if you stop paying.
Right.
But it's a lower cost up front. So some businesses often like the annual thing because that's a little easier to fit in budgets and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there are nice advantages to it in the sense of, like, for example, you always have the current version. You never have to worry about, I have to come up with, $500 or $700 or whatever to pay to get the new version that fixes the bugs or whatever. And I understand from, a big company's point of view, when you have those upgrades and you see a spike in income, and then there's, a lower income for a year, and then the next upgrade and a big spike in income, and then no income, this evens it all out by having a monthly fee. But I definitely don't like the idea of you renting the software, and as soon as you stop paying, it stops working, But of course, we are kind of heading towards that trend with a lot of these web apps and services.
Yeah, I certainly think you see a lot of things that are heading that way. And it might be also because it seems like software is starting to get devalued a bit. I mean, OS 10 upgrades are now free. Stuff you buy in the app stores, the prices keeps being lower and lower than what it was just 10 years ago.
Cents.
And, people that make software still need to be able to make a living. And, if people aren't going to pay a reasonable upfront price for the software, well, if they're now all of a sudden willing to pay a smaller amount frequently, maybe that's going to allow people to make software to make a living. And that might be the pattern that industry switches to. We'll see. Right now, definitely blended together, but.
Well, I've been seeing a lot of iPhone apps and things like that, and they it's whatever it's doing, say it's a shopping list or something like that, which you think, oh, that's a simple little app, but then it's got to have a cloud service to sync your shopping list to the cloud so that the shopping list can be synced to all your devices and all your computers, and then they charge some kind of a monthly fee to do that thing, and then You're like, well, if I want this service, I got to pay
it's
the
almost
fee.
like you're paying for the service, but the app, software is free. So the software is free and the service becomes what you're paying for. And
like Evernote.
It's semantics in many ways. But I mean, if people want to have software that's useful and well made, I mean, it costs money. It's just got to get paid for somehow.
Exactly. So, yeah, there's a lot of interesting trends going on. I'm very, very excited about iOS on Zojo. I mean, using Zojo on iOS, to create iOS apps, because I'm very curious about where that's going to take us and what we're going to be able to do with that, and what I'll just to get into that, because I haven't really done iOS stuff before, so I've been wanting it for such a long time.
Right. Well, I think that's a big thing, because I mean, a lot of people. I mean, you might say, well, it doesn't seem like there's people that have been avoiding iOS given how many apps are in the App Store. But I mean, there are a fair amount of people that have avoided it because it has always been very complicated to make stuff with it. And, Objective-C is not something that, as you mentioned earlier, people that aren't professional programmers are going to want to touch with a 10-foot pole. I mean,
right.
It's just that's a non-starter completely. Zojo has always been pretty approachable for people that aren't professional software developers.
Mm-hmm.
iOS is a little more complex than creating OS 10 and Windows apps, mostly because Apple has a lot of rules in place, and there's certain things you got to do regarding code signing, and you got to have a membership with Apple's iOS development program in order to do stuff. But once you do all that kind of setup, the act of creating the apps gets back to the simplicity that people are using.
Most of that's just a one-time setup, and then after that, you just click.
It's a one-time setup that is a little scary because you never had to deal with it before. If you're familiar with, but if you're coming from the having used any other tool, you're like, got to do with that. Apple makes you. There's nothing you can do about it. But
yeah, I'm working on an article for the next issue about that specific process, the deployment process, that side of things.
I think I got a webinar coming up later this month, and I'm going to attempt to go through that live. We'll see how successful I am.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
That one make me a little nervous, but yeah, it's. I think I've done it enough times now that theoretically it should go smoothly. But every time I try to do things live in my webinars, something goes wrong.
Yeah, that's the sort of.
It doesn't matter how many times I've practiced. I've gone through this 10 times. We're good to go for a webinar. Do it during the webinar. Oh, it doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work. And then, I'm sweating bricks over here. No one can see me. I'm trying not to start crying. But
just think how Steve Jobs felt in that iPhone introduction.
Yeah, well, at least, everyone backstage knew they were going to get fired by him. I'm like, I can't.
Oh, yeah.
I just I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm going to fire my cat. That's what I'm going to do.
Half the icons on there didn't actually work. So he hit the wrong one, it would crash stuff, apparently. So
yeah, that certainly is one of the ultimate demos.
It's
So, the last issue of the magazine came out right when I was on vacation in Florida at the end of December, which was great. And it had a lot of iOS content in it, which was great because just the timing. iOS for Zojo had just come out a few weeks before that, and you were able to get some stuff in there.
Yeah, I had to do some, how Zojo doesn't tell you in advance when stuff's going to happen. So I didn't know exactly when that was going to come out, and fortunately it came out early enough in the month that I was able to change things around and get some content going. But I know I had other things I was planning on running in that issue, and then I said, well, we publish every other month, and so I figured if I didn't have any iOS content until March, that's that's a long time to wait from a
Right.
mid-December iOS release to having the first article on iOS coming out in March. So I said, no, you've got to have some iOS stuff in the January issue. So I wrote a couple things and actually built an app in my beginners column where I actually, go from scratch to build a little app that it's an app that I've been wanting for a long time, and sort of like a tip calculator, but a little bit more complicated than that. But it came out really good. It works really good. I haven't actually deployed it to my phone yet. That's one of the next things I'm going to do and write an article about that. But at least as far as how it works in the simulator, it seems to work just fine. And and it was so that was fun. I got to play with that and wrote different articles about. My main article was the overview, kind of going over the whole process. People that aren't familiar with the the concept or whatever. Like if you're a Windows user, for example, you might be somewhat interested in iOS, but if you don't have a Mac, you're not really into that, and you don't have a clue exactly how it all works, what's required. So I kind of did a nice general overview that just covers all the different, the state of iOS compiling, with Zojo kind of right now. And might have to do an update, in 6 months or a year or something when we see how things have changed over that period of time. But, it kind of gives you an idea where we are right now and what's needed. And I thought it came up pretty good.
Yeah, well, certainly there's obviously a ton of interest. I mean, as I think I mentioned on my last podcast with Travis, I mean, the iOS stuff has been the number one feature request for years on our feedback system, which is now finally gone and closed as we, no longer need to add it. We just need to continue to add to it.
Yes.
But so there's just a ton of interest. I mean, so far, the first 2 webinars of this month have been very well attended. And the next 2 should be as well. I need to mix it up, though. I'm not just going to be only doing iOS webinars, but that's kind of, I've done, we've done at least 60 webinars on, desktop and web stuff. And,
right.
iOS being brandy new doesn't have anything. So it probably are going to be a majority of those for the short term anyway. And other stuff will need to be, I've kind of picked off the low-hanging fruit on the other things. So webinar topics now become much more involved, a lot more work to set up. Might not even be practical to do in just a single hour. It might need to be hard. So we'll see.
I've run into the same thing with the magazine, and I mentioned a comment in the latest issue that I came up with. I have a little publisher's column where I write just a short little thing about this particular about each issue, and I made a comment. I said it feels like with iOS arriving, it reminds me of the early days of Real Basic, back in the early days when everything was new and exciting, and you kind of I kind of missed that. I'd forgotten about how much, because it's sort of like as Real Basic became Real Studio and Real Studio became Zojo. It became a more mature product. It's more complete. It's got I realize there's certain people that complain that there's still stuff missing, but if you compare it to where it was, it's come a long, long way. And, and what you get out of the box is far more than you used to get. And yet, because of all that maturity, it doesn't feel quite as exciting. It feels like, it's already complete. There's not a lot left to do. And for me, having the iOS stuff, you get to see stuff break, right? It's exciting. It's play with stuff and see bugs and see, I don't know.
It's exciting. Well, it's been fun. I mean, I've been whipping out iOS apps for months now, and it's been fun kind of learning something new and figuring out how to do this and making things you couldn't make before that you kind of wanted to make. I mean, everyone has. You feel like you're walking on the moon.
You feel like you could do something and you're like the first person who's ever tried that feature, right? It feels kind of like it's like
maybe at times
clicked on this button before, or whatever. Not quite like that, but you know what I mean. It's you kind of get this feeling that it's and of course iOS itself is so huge. There's so much stuff there. It's such a rich. We're arriving at it. If Zojo had been able to do this back in 2008 when the App Store was created, we would have been developing alongside of all these other developers and watching, the App Store and the APIs for iOS, we'd be growing with them. But now we're arriving a little bit late, and it's like there's all this existing stuff on iOS, and we have to now like learn all that, learn the design, learn how things are done on an iPhone or an iPad. And that's a whole challenge right there, getting stuff to work on multiple devices. And now we've got lots of sizes and, new giant phones and all, it's really
it's a different mindset. I mean, when Real Basic first appeared, like you said, back in 1998, at that point, desktop was king. And desktop computers that ran a GUI operating system, the longest one that had been around was the Mac, and that would have been 14 years at that point. And,
right.
And then Windows had been out for less than 10.
That's true.
In any sort. So, I mean,
Windows 95 was the first version of Windows that was really usable.
That was really super popular. So that was just 5 years there. And so, I mean, that a lot of the GUI type stuff was still very, very new at that point. I mean, I think I still worked at a company back there in the late 90s that had a DOS app that we were selling. And
right.
I mean, half the people listening to this podcast, what the heck's a DOS app? But
yeah, exactly.
We still had those. And so being able to create these things was fun and so easily, because a lot of the tools that created GUI apps back then were very complicated. I mean, you had Code Warrior. You had, Microsoft's tools where you had to use C++ and a very complicated framework. And then Zojo came along, and it was very, very simplified and allowed regular people to make apps. And we're hoping that really the iOS part is going to go along the same thing and allow people to make apps more easily and more importantly, have more fun doing it.
Yeah, I tried when I first got into the Mac, which was in the late 80s and early 90s, I tried to learn about programming. I had done programming in Turbo Pascal on the PC back in high school, and actually got Turbo Pascal for the Mac. They actually made that, believe it or not. It was actually really cool. It was 21 kilobytes, the entire application. It was really, really tiny. I remember that vividly. And yet it could compile state. It was really fast. I mean, it really compiled well. But the way you had to build an app was you would write your Pascal code, and then you had to use a separate resource editor to create all of your windows and menus and everything else. And then you had to sort of like marry the two together and link them, and it was so convoluted that basically most people just used the Turbo Pascal in this mode where it sort of like created its own little text window, and you could type commands. Because it was too much work to create a GUI. And then a few years later, when I discovered Real Basic, that was exactly what I'd been wanting, because it was like, okay, here's a window. I drag some buttons on here. I click on that. It was like HyperCard in a little ways, where you double click on the button, and here's you put your code inside that button. And that was just, I said, I remember I used it for, I don't know, might have even, I know it was less than a week. I had a 30-day trial, and it was probably only like about 3 days, and I went and paid my money to get the full product. And I never do that. I always wait till like the 29th day, right? But
yes, exactly. Got to get my free trial value in. I'm going to use it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I get it for 30 days free. Why not wait until the 29th day and then start your year of free upgrades or whatever it is? But I was like, no, I want this. I got to buy it. So
yeah, I definitely remember those days as well. You had to code up your own event loop, process the events you're getting.
Yeah.
The operating system, hand them off to, the UI if necessary.
So complicated.
It was very tedious.
So, yeah, I spent hundreds of dollars. I have a shelf similar to yours where you have my magazines there. I have a shelf like that with books that are very similar in size called Inside Macintosh that Apple made. And they were these big, thick, some of them are 2 or 3 inches thick, huge books. And they had a whole series on every part of the Mac operating system. And they were like $50 a piece, and I spent hundreds of dollars on those, and never actually did anything with them because it was just way too complicated. And now, of course, when Mac OS X came out and everything, and everybody moved to Cocoa, and all that stuff's completely obsolete and useless. But I didn't throw away the books though, because I don't know.
They're collector's items now. I'm sure they're for a pretty penny on eBay. Just for
probably. I must have about 10 of them. I mean, I've got a pretty good set of lots of different, there's like a big thick one, 2 or 3 inches thick on QuickTime, and different topics, But you get in there and it's just like, I mean, it was really, really technical and complicated. And things have come a long way in software development over the last, couple of
Yeah, things are simpler, but then other things are more complicated. And
well, I think
it's a
the big
balance.
thing is that the expectations people have for an app has really changed. That's, I think, is the biggest thing. It used to be like if you just had like a word processor example, you could use like the edit field or text field in Zojo and call that a word processor, and people would be like, back in the 90s, it was like, hey, this is cool. I can type text. Today, if you do that, they're going to be like, what? I can't export to Word format or import Word or RTF or all these other things, or I can't put pictures in there and do all this stuff and have a ruler and, all these other things that they want to have that they just assume is like standard, and they don't realize how much work that is to actually, implement all those features. And people just assume all that stuff is just standard now because it's, they've
been exposed to it for so long that.
Yeah. So, and that's with every app. I mean, every app's got to have a great icon. It's got to have great, user interface and design. And I usually find that for me, the most complicated thing of doing an app, the 80% of just getting the app working is almost trivial compared to that last 10 or 20% of polishing it and getting ready to actually ship it to people because.
Yeah, that is way more. I mean, it happens to everybody. It's easy to start a project and get it most of the way there, but then that extra work you got to do at the end to shine and get it ready so you can actually ship it. And that's not, shipping software is hard. Writing software is a lot easier.
Really hard.
And
and it's not fun.
That's the other thing. The shipping isn't fun. Figuring out what you want for an icon. I mean, unless you like drawing these things, you got to either find something or hire someone. Going through all the work to code sign and do all these other little packaging details that you got to do to get it in the store. Setting up your store so you can accept. Or all that stuff is just kind of tedious work that isn't fun like programming. And
no. And especially if you're a small independent micro developer like me, where you're just one person, you have to wear all these hats yourself. You have to be the web designer, the IT consultant, set up all these things yourself, and know how to do everything. And it's becomes a lot of work. Like in my case, I haven't been updating my ZWrite and my word processor and my other software in large part because I've got a software. I'm working on a website update for the last 10 years that I haven't finished.
Which sounds really web to go away, Mark. Is that it?
Yeah. Well, it's like everything kind of depends on everything else. So it's like I didn't want to have the app ready because if I don't have the new website, and I need the website, and then I needed some other stuff, which meant I needed a database, which meant I needed something else. And so then I was writing all these programs to help, it was just kind of this never ending loop. And then of course my main job is to do the magazine. So I've got to, keep that going. And that keeps coming up, it's like you can just do one issue and then go, okay, now we're done. No, we're not done. You got to do the next one,
Right. Yeah. I can't even imagine if you're spitting those out every month. I mean, you're doing them every month.
Yeah, I've looked at. I thought about that. In a lot of ways, it would be better to go monthly because it'd be fresher in people's minds and things like that. But the schedule's just killer if you do that. Even if I, because I've thought about doing that, like having half the number of pages, but having it every month. But the problem is then you have that responsibility every month. You get no break at all. There's
and there's overhead associated with that. It doesn't go away just because you cut the pages in half, and that overhead stays gone.
Yeah, exactly. Cutting the pages in half would only reduce my actual workload by, say, 20%. So it wouldn't necessarily, make things that much, for that because a huge percent of that work is you'd have every issue. It's just the process of putting out the issue.
I always imagine the huge percent of your work is, roping up those of us that write for you and saying, where the heck's my column? You're late again.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, you have to connect to everybody and try to get people to write for you and bug them in a nice way that you're not going to be too mean so they don't, ever want to write for you again. But, so there's probably, I'd say, the actual writing of articles and putting stuff into the magazine itself, the content is really probably only about 10 or 20% of the work of producing a magazine. Everything else is all the business side of organizing everything, maintaining subscriptions, and updating people's addresses when they move and change things, and responding to, people like to wait about 6 months after they haven't got an issue, and they're like, what happened to that issue? I never got that one from last summer. And it's like, okay, well, let's look and see. You're still subscribed. For some reason you probably went into the junk folder or something, and so a lot of stuff like that eats up time, and that's just the nature of any kind of business. Really, is you just have that kind of overhead that you're going to have no matter what, But I looked at doing monthly, and I just said, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. I think I really like the content that we've got and the format we had. If I had, if it was a bigger business, if I could have more people and if it was a bigger industry, let's say, because it's a pretty niche industry when you focus a product like the magazine that's just for one product like Zojo.
Right.
That really narrows me down, and it's very hard to really have a big market for something like that. So, but I'm pretty happy. I mean, we're starting our 13th year. That's pretty impressive to be able to stay in existence that long. And
it's wicked impressive. I mean, you haven't missed an issue ever. I'm aware of.
I think the only one we did was we delayed. We didn't really miss an issue in the sense of we just delayed it.
When you adjusted the volumes, yeah.
Yeah, when I was in the hospital, and then I made a couple scheduling adjustments to the schedule. But the last one I did was a couple of years ago. We made it so that now we have, because I launched in the midsummer. The first issue came out in the midsummer, so then every year was always off of the calendar, which was really annoying. So a full year's issues was half of 1 year and half of another year, a calendar year. So it was really annoying. So now we've got it. So the issue we just released is the January 2015 issue, and it's volume 13.1. So it's the first issue of the 13th year, and it's January. Now
for programmers, I think that's pretty important to have it lined up like that.
Yeah, well, it always bugged me, and it was just sort of those things. And when we got close enough to that, where we were just a couple months off one year, I said, you know what, I'm just going to postpone the December issue to January, and then they'll all line up, and it just makes it a lot easier. And so that's good. So I don't have any plans to do any changes like that, but it's pretty good. Yeah. For 13 years. And the only time I missed it was the time I ended up in the hospital in 2006. And I had a good excuse. So
yeah,
pancreatitis and it was not good. So, so I'm pretty healthy now. So hopefully nothing like that happens again. So,
well, that's good news. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, longevity is always amazing because you think back and that is a long time for any programming language. It's 10 years now, and or as you said, 13, I guess at this point.
Yeah, we just started 13.
If you start back at the beginning and you back up 13 years, you're into the 80s and DOS, and there weren't a lot of magazines I imagine that were writing about DOS that were still publishing in the 2000s. So.
No, that's true. I hadn't thought about it like that, but you're right. Yeah. And you look at, the magazines that I grew up in high school was a magazine like, say, Byte magazine.
Right. Yeah.
Byte. A little bit. But there was all these, great historical magazines that, all those guys are gone. Even Macworld just went away. It's now just the website.
Well, I was just thinking back too, is 13 years prior, I would have been using an Atari computer back in the late 80s that, even the company would have been gone away by that point.
There you go. It's true. Yeah, it's funny the way. Yeah, well, we tend to forget just how big. They talk about internet time and things like that, but even computer time is faster than normal, and not even getting into internet time, which is really fast. But things really change. It's really amazing. So it's pretty exciting to be able to do that. And I feel honestly, I feel better than ever about the future of this, because I think iOS is really going to expand the market for Zojo, and I want Zojo to be successful and healthy, because, the better it is, that's more of a market. The bigger that market is, then that's more of a market for my publication. So,
right. Well, we want it better for lots of reasons, but bigger and better is. Jeff had sent around an email to the staff today, something an editorial in SD Magazine that they published. I don't know, the last issue. I get those. Those are all email only. It's at Software Development Magazine is what that is.
Oh, okay.
People don't know. I've been getting that magazine for years, like 15 years. And it's kind of an IT focus, but more on the developer side. And, I've been getting it probably since the late 90s. But they stopped doing print, I guess, because I only now ever get it PDF. But I haven't looked at the last one. But apparently there was an editorial in there, and one of the predictions for 2015 was that RAD tools were going to make a comeback because people are getting fed up of having to write their software using a bunch of different tools that aren't connected in any way. And, we're all like, yeah, RAD, way to go. That's definitely what I mean, it is so much faster to build things. And, people want to make stuff. Most people anyway, they want to have something that's useful in the end. They don't want to just spend their time fiddling with their tools
and then I think the way that the mobile has been this thing that's just revolutionized everything because, like for example, I mentioned being in the hospital. One of the side effects of that was I became a diabetic, so I really began watching what I eat and tracking my calories and all everything that I eat, and really keeping an eye on that. And so I wrote an app using Real Studio probably at the time on my Mac that I could put in a food and it would actually show me the breakdown of how the calories and all the nutrition elements in that food, and it would even work with recipes, so I could tell it I've got a recipe I'm making, it's got yogurt and a banana and these things in it, and I'm going to have, 1 cup, and it would know exactly, from the whole recipe, I'm having a quarter of the recipe. Here's my calories for that amount, And I had a digital scale that I could actually weigh them out so that I could put in that weight, and it would give me the exact amount of calories and, protein and carbohydrates and everything that I was eating. But I never finished or shipped this app, because by the time I got it to about that 80% level, and I was at that point where I needed to go to the next step, the iPhone was out. And I was doing everything on the iPhone, and I said, I had already used various apps, and the fact that I have to go to a computer and type all this information in was horrible. I'm like, I want to do this on my phone.
Right.
And of course, I couldn't make the app on my phone. And so... but I basically lost all the enthusiasm of making it for the desktop, because I'm like, specifically for that particular app, that was something you needed on the phone. That was,
it's more practical on the phone because you're always going to have your phone with you, and
exactly.
You're at a most people don't keep their computer in their kitchen. Some people do, but most people don't.
Yeah, I had a little old one of those old white MacBooks that I kept in my kitchen just for doing the calorie stuff, but. That was, it worked okay for that. But if I'm not in my kitchen, if I'm at a restaurant or something, or, doing traveling or whatever, and just most things, it's just more convenient. You've got your phone with you. That's where you want to put that stuff. And of course, since that time, there's about 50,000 different, calorie tracking apps for the iPhone and all sorts of things. So it's a product that it doesn't, I don't really need anymore because I've got other apps that do that now. But at the time, but to me, that was kind of one of those moments where the desire to write desktop software was really minimized because our lives have changed. Now we're on mobile, and so that's why I think the iOS stuff is so exciting, because that's where, and I think you're mentioning the RAD stuff is significant because I think we're going to see a lot of people, doctors and lawyers, people that I mentioned earlier, that are attracted to a platform like Zojo because they're not traditional programmers. They want the same things that they wanted, in desktop 10 or 20 years ago. Now they want those on their iPhone and their iPad. And now with Zojo, they'll be able to do that. And so I think that's going to be a big thing where you're going to see more and more people that just want a simple app and don't want to have to pay a developer, $5,000 or $10,000 to create a little simple app for them. They can use Zojo and do it themselves and, have their own iPhone app, even if it's not something they want to sell. They just want to use it for themselves.
Right. Well, and the related side is people that do consulting with Zojo. I mean, even when I was doing consulting before I started here at Zojo, getting clients would always ask for something that was mobile. And
right.
Usually I would have to defer a little bit or, send them to someone else that was doing Objective-C work. And, those projects always cost a lot more because it took longer to make those apps using those tools.
You got to have more developers in the.
But now it's just, it's an add-on. It makes it easier to sell a project to a client. You say, well, now I can whip out, the desktop app you want to run your business on. I can make companion web and mobile apps very easily without, making the project price go up tenfold. So, that should be a big selling point. As a lot of times, you're making apps like you described that, that people just need something that will help their business work more efficiently. And Zojo's often very good at creating those things easily.
Well, people have asked me for years why, XDev doesn't have an iOS app. And I said, well, only a percentage of my subscribers, not all my subscribers are on iOS for one thing, and then of the people that are on iOS, how many of them are using Zojo, so it's not necessarily a giant market for XDev Magazine, on iOS. And at the time, the only way to create an iOS app was Objective-C. So either I have to spend a year learning Objective-C to write this app, or I have to hire a programmer for $5,000 to have them create an app, and it just didn't seem to make a lot of financial sense to sell a few extra copies of an issue, to pay somebody a ton of money to develop something that, it's a PDF. You can download it and look at it on your iPad. You really need a custom for that.
Yeah, and looking back, it seemed, Apple added that newsstand functionality for kind of making magazine distribution easier for iPads, but it seems like that really hasn't taken off too well. And
I think it's dead.
Yeah, it might even be dead. One of the big ones there was the one called The Magazine that and that one kind of just disappeared relatively recently. And
Marco ran it, and then he sold it to Glenn Fleshman, and then he folded it up after a year or so. And if that one couldn't make it, then that tells you,
Yeah, and if you go down to be more niche, then generally speaking, you would have to sell it for more money. And
right.
And does that make sense? Trickier?
And then like one of the things I've looked at is how would I go about creating an app like that? What kind of an app would it be? Would it just be something that lets you view the PDF? Or is it an app that lets you, obviously the main attraction would be to have other features, like look through all the back issues, to have a search feature, things like that. And then also, of course, to be able to purchase new issues and things like that. So you don't want to have like a separate app for each issue. That would be a nightmare, right? So somebody have
that might not scale too well.
Right. So you'd want to have one app where they can use the in-app purchasing or something and download the new issue. But then it's like you get into how are you going to manage that? Well, now you have to have a server with something on the server that can talk to your app, basically a web app of some kind that can communicate and tell it, okay, this person's just paid, send them this issue, download it. If they've paid for an issue in the past, it could allow them to re-download that. You're getting into an awful lot of complexity for what's potentially a handful of interested users. And it's like, is it really worth it for all that? I haven't seen it yet. It doesn't seem like it to me, and it seems like an awful.
Well, yeah, and particularly in your case, none of that is needed. People can just purchase the PDF directly from you and read it on whatever device they want.
Exactly. So, yeah. So, but it's interesting. I'm definitely exploring that type of thing. It's definitely something I'm interested in doing. And I have some ideas I've thought about, now that iOS is here, I can actually start, exploring some of these ideas. But I've thought about creating some other companion apps for XDev, subscribers. For example, I could have an app, maybe it's even free, that just gives you like the access to the index. And so if you want to find a topic, it will help you find the topic. And then there's a link to buy that via Gumroad or something, to buy that issue and make it a free app.
Right. That's the sort of thing, though, that you got to be wary of Apple's rules. So, Apple's rules are very rigid, and having a link to buy an app that doesn't go through Apple, that's probably grounds for rejection.
Well, it wouldn't be an app. It would be no different from redirecting somebody to the website to buy something. So I don't think it would be.
It's just something you have to be careful of.
It is something to look at. You're right. So, yeah.
You never know what they're going to reject for. I know, like things like, Amazon's video app, you can't buy the videos in Amazon's video app.
Well, that's what, like, my mom, she has her iPhone, and she's always calling me, and she's like, I'm trying to buy a Kindle book, and I can't do it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I spend 5 minutes on the phone with her, and I finally figured out she's typed Amazon in her Spotlight search on her phone, and it's brought up the Amazon app. So she goes to the Amazon app, which lets you buy, washing machines and everything,
yeah,
right?
Stuff.
And she puts in the name of her book, and it doesn't show the Kindle book. It only shows her the print books, because they are not allowed to sell the digital in that app. They can sell the print book, but not the digital. And so then I have to point out to her, you have to go to Safari and go to Amazon directly. And of course, that's way too many steps, So I finally created a bookmark to the Kindle bookstore, which I put on her, as an icon on her phone. And then we called it Kindle Store. So I tell her, when you're looking for a Kindle book, go to the Kindle Store, type in the title or the author. There's the book. You can buy it with one click. And that seems to have helped a bit, but every now and then she still gets confused and can't figure out why, and she's gone into the Amazon app. And it's, I'm a big Apple fan, but that one right there, is a little frustrating, but I understand why. I don't know what the solution for that is, because from Apple's perspective, if they open that door where people can sell digital content, pretty much everybody would bypass, like all the in-app purchasing and everything would just bypass Apple. And Apple would
they'll allow you to sell the digital content in the app. Yeah. You just have to give them the 30%.
Right.
So Amazon's like, well, we don't have a 30% margin here to give you.
Right. They're not. So no, exactly.
And yes, that becomes the thing. I mean, I've heard people talk about, well, Apple should cut a special deal with Amazon and take a smaller cut so that Amazon stuff would be available. That would be more helpful to everybody, I would think, especially the customers. But so far, I don't know if they both appear to think, that's not going to happen. So.
Right. And Amazon did that thing with that comic app, Comixology, that they bought. And Comixology used to take that 30% cut. They would lose that. But when Amazon bought them, Amazon removed that option. So you can't use Apple's purchasing to purchase comics. You have to go to a website and use Amazon's convoluted purchasing system to buy the comics now.
And I agree.
A lot of people, because it was so easy before. It was right within the app. If you want a comic, you just hit a button. Nowadays, you would use your fingerprint with Touch ID and buy it instantly without having to type in your password or anything. It'd be so much better. But then, of course, they're losing 30% of that price for the comic. They have to give to Apple, and they don't want to do that. So.
Right. Yeah, you imagine that's going to eventually get resolved. You wouldn't think Apple would want to, force people to go elsewhere. And you think Amazon would, Amazon likes to sell more. They make it up in volume kind of thing. So you think they'd want to have it as easy as possible for people to buy stuff.
I've been waiting for Apple to cut that price down, from 30% down to 20% or something, or make some different adjustments, to certain things. Even if, like the digital, if they did it for, say, 10%, for example. Instead of 30%, it was just 10%. Maybe companies like Amazon say, well, okay, we'll take, 10% is reasonable.
I'm sure they thought about that. It's just they have to be wary of the people that will exploit that in some way. Because if
that's the tricky part.
30% for an app purchase, but it'll be 10% for digital content. Oh, how about we switch over our apps to be free and everything is, some sort of add-on that would only pay the 10% fee? Well, you know what? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, Apple probably doesn't need to take any cut really at this point, but they're not in it to.
I just saw their numbers. They've sold $25 billion worth of stuff on the App Store. I mean, the numbers are just phenomenal. It's crazy. But,
certainly it is now kind of the one-stop place that people go to. I mean, even on the Mac side, people go there to buy stuff because it is just so darn easy. So
yeah.
On the iPhone side, it's pretty much, the only place you can go. I mean, really jailbreaks their phone to put apps you can buy elsewhere on there. So that's not significant in any way. But yeah, I mean, there's just a ton of people with phones and a ton of people that use that app store. And even though most people like, I'm not paying more than $1 for an app. If you hit it right and you get, a tiny percentage of those, I don't know how many people, like 200 million or more people that own iOS devices.
It's more like 500 million.
500, yes, I don't count. But, you get a tiny percentage of that and you're a happy person. But
yeah.
But it's also easy to get lost in the shuffle because there are so much stuff.
Yeah, I think that's going to be it's been a while since I've done the software development side of things. Back in the 90s when I had my Z-Write, I mean, I was amazed at how, in a sense, easy it was. You release your app, you publicize it on a few websites, and people started buying my app right and left. It was pretty fun. Those numbers were like tiny compared to the billions and millions you hear about today when people are, doing apps. And, if somebody has an app that only sells 100,000, it's like, wow, that's a wimpy, number. But the truth is, if you're making a dollar or two on that, that's significant, significant money. But I think the hard thing is it's getting harder and harder to get that many people to even hear about your app and notice it, because find the discoverability of finding apps on the App Store is a big challenge. And I think we'll probably have some articles, on that type of topic, sometime this next year, because, as people now can use Zojo to create iOS apps, that's going to be a big thing, is how do you get your app, how do you market your app? How do you get it noticed? Things like that. We've done articles like that, in the past for the desktop, but, on iOS, it's a whole new ballgame.
Yeah, it's definitely, and you're kind of jumping into a big pool to start with. So
yeah, well, that's the thing. There's a lot of competition. It's hard enough finding that there's no app in your category, that there's no, and if there is no app in your category, maybe that's a sign that your app really isn't something anybody wants.
Does that mean you get the world's best idea, or does that mean you get the world's worst idea? It's tough to
exactly. Yeah, it's tricky, but it's going to be fun. Like I said, this really feels it's exciting to me. It feels like the early days of the Mac, or the early days of Real Basic, when things were more primitive and unknown. And you like I said earlier, it feels like we're walking on the moon. It feels exciting, like you're doing something that's possibly never been done before. And that's, I'm excited about it.
Well, I truly hope lots of people are excited about this. We're all very excited here at Zojo. And I know some people change and things that are new. It's a little scary. So, stick with what you know. And then eventually stuff like this won't be brandy new, and it'll be that. And then you'll just slide over to that, and then you're happy too. So
That's true. Yeah, I often think about stuff like that, because there's certain things that at one time were really convoluted and complicated. Probably the simplest example for me would be something like, updating your website or something, working with HTML and whatever and stuff like that. And years ago when all that was starting out, it was like, what is all this stuff? It's so complicated. And then now it's like, you do it without even really thinking about it. It's pretty, simple you get in a routine and get workflows. And I think that's the way.
You're the king of workflows, Mark. I've never seen anyone.
I love workflows.
So many tools that automate things. You're always pumping those things.
Definitely do that. Yeah, I love to make. Yeah, I always say laziness. My favorite motto is laziness is the mother of invention. So.
Well, that's one thing that I think all programmers would say they have in common is, at their core, they're probably lazy, which is why they write programs so that they only have to do that one time.
Does the work for them.
The computer does the rest of the work for them.
Exactly. Of course, then I do the opposite too, because I'm always reinventing the wheel. Because
well,
that's probably a whole other psychological in-depth thing about what's really wrong with me. But I see somebody else has got a tool for doing something, and I'm like, yeah, I can write my own. I don't want to have to learn that API. I can just write my own. And then of course a year later, I can't even understand my own API either, because I didn't document it or something. So it's better off using the whatever tool somebody else created. And like I just saw Kem. I haven't even looked at it yet, but I just saw yesterday Kem. I'm going to say his last name wrong, but he wrote a self-updater class. Did you see that? It was on the forum.
Tech and Eyes, self-updater.
Yeah. And I thought, well, that sounds cool, because I haven't looked at it to see exactly what it is, but I've delved in a little bit of that kind of stuff, because I've got my own sort of self-updater thing that I wrote that I use, which works fairly well, but that's one of those things. It's like, do I use his thing and then I'm stuck with his flaws or whatever, however that one works, and I have to learn how to use his thing, or do I write my own? It's like complicated, decisions.
So many decisions that you have to make. Well, I want to thank you, Mark, for being my guest on this this
Oh,
podcast.
this has been great. Good to talk to you.
And as I haven't been warning prior guests, but I'll warn you, is that this may mean that in the future I'll ask you to be a guest again.
Sure. I like to talk, so as you can tell. So
that's great. Well, I mean, there's a large number of people in the Zojo community that I think would make great guests on the Zojo Talk podcast, and I'm hunting them down and trying to sweet talk them into having a little chat on some fun weekday afternoon. So
that's great. That's great.
Thank you very much, Mark, and stay tuned for our next Zojo Talk podcast.